Hi, everybody, and welcome back. The American housing crisis didn't just happen overnight, and certainly not something that only happened due to the pandemic. In fact, housing has been in crisis long before the pandemic. Back-to-back recessions in the 1980s, combined with the Reagan administration's severe federal cuts to low-income housing and poverty assistance programs, drove an increasing number of Americans into homelessness. At the same time, well-paying manufacturing jobs were offshored, forcing many workers to start pushing brooms at McDonald's. On top of that, fuel crisis drove up rents, displacing homeowners that couldn't keep up with the rent, and allowing a generation of gentrifiers to settle in. Furthermore, the Reagan-era tax reforms favored the development of high-end single-family homes, but not of affordable multifamily rentals. In 1985, 515,000 multifamily homes were built in America, but only 140,000 were built in 1991. As people began competing for fewer and fewer apartments, the low-income housing market devolved into a game of musical chairs, and like any other game, someone is bound to lose. Within the span of a decade, it has become a new normal for rent prices in places like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco to cost $2,500 per month, and even more depending on which area you're going to rent. About a third of the population of Los Angeles spends the majority of their income in housing. Meanwhile, 20% of renters in New York City pay the majority of their income to their landlord. However, these ridiculous prices are not unique to the big cities. In fact, this is common for over 95% of the U.S. counties, wherein workers that earn the minimum wage do not make enough to afford a one-bedroom rental on their own. As a result, even before the pandemic, more than 500,000 Americans were already homeless, on top of millions of people on the verge of losing their homes and countless families struggling month after month to make ends meet. The states of California, New York, Florida, Washington, and Texas now account for 57% of all homeless people. Not surprisingly, these are the cities where affordable housing is scarce. So-called NIMBYs are powerful, and the yawning gap between median income and housing costs continue to widen. The fact that housing in this country is treated as a commodity rather than a right is at the root of all this suffering. Over the years, the government has made little to no steps to address the long-running housing affordability problem and homelessness. And tucked within those tiny steps is Section 8 housing, which was supposed to help people get out of poverty, but it's instead trapped people within it. Before we get into that, please just take a moment and hit the like and subscribe below. It really helps the channel grow and reach other viewers just like yourself. The Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, established by Congress in 1974, was intended to assist families in relocating from troubled urban areas to areas where they could live without fear of violence and their children could attend good schools. The way Section 8 housing works is if you're lucky enough to get off the lengthy waiting list, you're now allowed to look up for apartments that is within a certain price bracket or what they call fair market rent. Now, Section 8 housing tenants would pay 30% of their income for the rent, and the voucher will pay for the rest. However, the fair market rent cutoff point frequently confines voucher holders to impoverished areas. In New York City, for example, the fair market rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $1,250 a month, a price that would relegate voucher holders to Brownsville in Brooklyn, one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods and where the majority of public housing is located. On top of that, many landlords will do anything to keep voucher holders out. According to the Austin Tenants Council, there are over 78,000 units in the Austin area that had rents within the fair market rent limits. However, only 8,590 of those apartments accepted vouchers and had no minimum income requirements for tenants. As a result, most Section 8 housing tenants were located on the east side of Austin in high poverty areas with underperforming schools and high crime rates. However, it's also important to note that there has been an improvement in providing affordable homes for homeless people in the recent years. We can take Houston as an example, which is notorious for being one of the cities that has high per capita homeless counts. One way that the Houston Housing Authority addressed this dire situation is by hosting a lottery for federal housing vouchers for homeless people every 5 or 6 years. However, this is not a recipe for housing all the homeless people because, of course, even if you're lucky enough to have your name drawn, you still have to have a street address to receive the mail. But since then, Houston has made a significant progress by collaborating with county agencies and persuading scores of local service providers, corporations, and charitable nonprofits to advocate for a housing first policy that relocates the most vulnerable people from the streets to apartments. During the last decade, more than 25,000 homeless people in Houston have been placed in apartments and houses. And after just 2 years, the vast majority of them have remained housed. According to the most recent data from local officials, the number of people classified as homeless in the Houston area has decreased by 63% since 2011. And even by the more modest metrics recorded in a 2020 federal report, Houston still outperformed the rest of the country in reducing homelessness over the previous decade. So what makes this system work better compared to Section 8 housing? It's because this system doesn't only stop at housing people, they also provide their necessities such as money for rent, utilities, bus fare, transportation, and on top of that, they're also given a case manager who helps with access to employment programs and rehabilitation. Now, there are programs for addiction recovery and religious conversion that help people get off the street. However, housing requires a different type of logic. If you're drowning, it doesn't help if your rescuer insists on teaching you how to swim before returning you to the shore. Once you're on land, that's when you choose whether to deal with your problem or not. In either case, you can join a larger population of people who are battling their own demons behind closed doors. However, when compared to other countries, America seems to be lacking a lot despite being one of the richest countries in the world. In other countries, housing like education and healthcare is regarded as a fundamental right, and the government goes through great lengths just to ensure that everybody has a home, while the market plays a much smaller role in housing construction and distribution. For example, let's look at Red Vienna. In 1923, Vienna, which was the fifth largest city in the world, was able to build 60,000 brand new apartments in its first year of the seemingly ambitious program of social housing. Unlike America's idea of public housing, wherein the system still revolves around private ownership, these apartments are built by the government and financed by taxing the rich. Vienna's social housing also lacks the chronic neglect and underinvestment that the U.S. public housing is known for. Residents in Vienna's social housing would have access to courtyards, expansive open spaces, plenty of natural light. They had communal laundry facilities, cutting-edge kitchens, food co-ops, bathhouses, pharmacies, lecture halls, schools, and even swimming pools. Vienna's social housing was also built in desirable areas and must meet architectural and livability standards that appeal to people at all income levels. But the highlight of the system is that these apartments weren't built for commodification and to make profit. Instead, they are built for shelter, which explains why the average rent in Viennese social housing in 1926 was only about 4% of the monthly wage. That's 10 times less than what Americans spend. Today, an astounding 62% of all city residents live in social housing, with average monthly rents ranging between $400 and $600, and with subsidies available for lower income tenants. That's significantly far from what Americans pay. In Vienna social housing, rent prices do not fluctuate dramatically year after year, in part because the government constructs thousands of new social housing units every year, ensuring that supply always meets the demand. What is also amazing about Vienna's social housing is that these are not exclusive to poor citizens. In fact, except for the top fifth of the population, everyone is eligible for social housing, which means that even the affluent Viennese people share walls with the working class residents. This also makes Vienna's social housing a mixed income housing that abolishes the segregation of social classes. This also makes Vienna's social housing a mixed income housing that abolishes the segregation and reduces the stigmatization of social classes. Now, Vienna has not completely removed housing from the market. Residents continue to pay a portion of their earnings in rent to cover operating costs, and a sizable proportion of the population resides in private housing. But this is a prime example of what could happen when we decommodify housing. This might seem like a utopia for most people living in New York or California or Texas, because right now, tax dollars are constantly being thrown at developers who are building a slew of projects that are inaccessible to a large number of people in the United States. What the Gravel Institute suggests we do is start by protecting people living on the private market against What the Gravel Institute suggests we do is start by protecting people living on the private market against abuse and exploitations, such as preventing landlords from raising rents too dramatically, requiring evictions to be approved by a judge, and granting tenants the right to renew their lease. And to take it a step further, we can create community land trusts to gradually acquire private market housing and convert it to community ownership. And we can fully commit to pushing the boundaries of social housing by discontinuing subsidies for luxury housing development and reinvesting our wealth in beautiful, high-quality social housing projects that provide good homes and strong communities to everyone. It's also important to note that there are still improvements to be done in Vienna's system, but this shows how affordable homes are possible and how much we are being robbed of our rights to have a roof over everyone's head. That's it for today's video. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell so that you can be updated whenever we upload new videos. We'll talk in the next one.